Hi, and welcome to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast presented by Wolf Precision Incorporated, where we learn about and share long range shooting and custom rifle building. I am your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. Hi, and welcome to Wolf Precision's Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. In this episode, as promised, we are going to invite on for an interview the owner of Bat Machine Company, Mr. Bruce A. Thom, in which we're going to talk about the Ignitor as well as the new BumbleBee that they introduced. And I think it's both world-class actions and some great stuff behind it, and how they were developed, why they made the decisions that they did. And it really just gives you an insight not only into the quality of the work that they do, but the thought process and how much they care and how passionate they are about some of the smallest details when it comes to building super high quality actions. So without further ado, here we go. All right, before we get started in the podcast, I do want to say thank you to two sponsors. We'd like to thank Krieger Barrels, maker of fine cut rifle barrels. If you're interested in a great quality rifle barrel and you need it now, stop over to KriegerDirect.com. That's KriegerDirect.com, where you can order your barrel from in-stock selections and have your barrel in as little as 2 to 3 days. We'd also like to thank TriggerTech. TriggerTech is a maker of fine rifle triggers. That is what we use here in all of our custom rifles, and you have both a single-stage and two-stage triggers to choose from, as well as a lot of other makes and models that will fit other rifles. So even if you're looking for an aftermarket trigger for your factory rifle, there's a good chance they got a great selection for you to choose from. There's a good chance that you have a great selection for you to choose from. So stop over to TriggerTech.com. That's TriggerTech.com today. All right, I've been really looking forward to this podcast and bringing Bruce back onto the show. So without further ado, let's get Bruce on the line here and have a great interview talking about the Ignitor and BumbleBee action. So I have with me today Bruce Thom. Bruce is the owner of Bat Machine. They manufacture the actions that we build on, all the Bat Tactical and the Ignitor and the BumbleBee. And so I thought it would be really awesome to invite Bruce on to talk a little bit about the BumbleBee and the Ignitor and some of the history and stuff. So Bruce, thank you so much for taking the time to come on.
Oh, you're welcome. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Jamie.
So I guess the best place to start would be to talk about the BumbleBee. And I guess a couple of the questions that customers ask a lot, and then maybe you can talk a little bit about the history of it, of how you come up with it, but it's an aluminum action with a steel insert, and then I'd like you to take it from there as to why you chose to go that route and the benefits that you found in making it that way.
Well, we've been bugged a lot by customers for a lighter weight receiver, and of course, over the years, people had asked us for titanium receivers, and we don't really like titanium for a receiver material. The folks that are now making titanium actions have overcome some of the issues with titanium. It's always been kind of makes kind of a sticky feeling action as far as the operation of it. And the other issue that I have always that's bothered me about titanium for rifle actions is the springiness of titanium. In other words, during the firing cycle, it has a tendency to stretch more. It's a very tough material, but it has more, in technical terms, what they call its modulus of elasticity is quite a bit higher than materials like steel and aluminum. So, in other words, it stretches a lot more under tension or deflection.
So would it be something that would be in the firing process, like a flexing of the action in there, or just over time of the wear and tear on it?
It's not a wear and tear issue. It's more the flex that happens during the firing cycle. Mm-hmm. And it's really not a big deal. Obviously, there's, people successfully making titanium actions that work just fine. But what we had seen in the bench rest world, where everybody's always pushing things to the maximum and beyond what you really should safely push things on a regular basis, they do it all the time. And in that situation, you would notice that you would get more case stretch than on a steel action. Some folks had trouble with barrels working loose just because everything stretches and then comes back and then stretches and comes back with each firing cycle. And like I say, it's more of that happens more on the extreme end of pressures, not so much at normal factory pressures. But we wanted to avoid all that. So that's why we chose to go with an aluminum steel hybrid style receiver. What that allowed us to do was make a receiver that is, I guess I would call it fully featured. Integral lugs, integral pick rail, lots of material all around it for receiver stiffness. So we're basically creating a receiver that's stiffer than even our steel receivers as far as receiver flex from barrel weight, and still have an action that weighs right with the titanium receiver, depending on the configuration of the titanium receiver, sometimes even lighter, and a much stiffer receiver as far as its ability to hold heavier barrels if a person chooses to do that, which is not really the point of a light receiver. But anyway, it just makes a really good platform overall for extreme accuracy. And it's not new. Kelby's, with their Stoll action, has made an aluminum hybrid benchrest receiver for, I think it was 1977. Ralph Stoll originally started making that receiver. So they work very well. And then, of course, Stiller made the Viper for years. But yeah, you'd have to look at the specs on our website, but Daryl ran all the finite element analysis on that receiver and shows the stiffness difference between it and steel and titanium receivers.
Yeah, when I was on there, one of the things that stood out a lot, and maybe it has to do with the design of the receiver, that it was not just a little stronger than titanium, but I think on the website it's something like 170%, which is a lot. That's
not stronger in the firing point of it. That's just the stiffness of the receiver if you grab both ends and bend it.
The rigidity of it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So did the design change? Because one of the things I thought was really cool about the action is it really is a 700 footprint, but sort of just squared off at the bottom. Did that have a lot to do with making it as stiff as well?
Yeah, that definitely adds stiffness. Just the shape of it. The other reason we did, I guess the reason we did is because we wanted it stiff, and then the other reason was that we could do it and not gain a significant amount of weight. And flat bottom action made it's just a really easy way to mate to a stock. We see so many poorly fitting chassis type stocks with round actions that don't really give an ideal receiver to stock mating. They tend to distort the action a bit when you suck the screws down. Some of them are better than others, but with the flat bottom, it's flat. It's just, it's kind of hard to screw up.
Yeah, it's not going to draw it down. And now to go back to the flexing part, we had talked about torquing the action down to the appropriate specs, and I believe it was you that had said that you can actually distort an action if you over tighten it. Like a typical Remington 700 round type receiver, if you start really cranking on those action screws and you're not paying attention, that you can actually pull that down. I was fascinated by that, and it wasn't like that it took a pipe wrench to do it. Is that true?
Yeah, that's especially true if it's not actually bedded or if the chassis system doesn't fit the receiver well. You got to remember the Remington 700 is an inch 350 round diameter. It's just a tube, and it really doesn't take a lot to distort it. So yeah, without the chassis matching the receiver, being straight and somewhat matching the the bottom radiuses.
Mm-hmm.
If there's like a gap, a lot of the chassis will use like a couple humps.
Right, like the rails along the sides.
Yeah, yeah. And so if there's like a large gap underneath those humps, you'll definitely suck the receiver out around as you pull it down.
Like one of the big issues we have here with stocks, and we were talking about this with like the BumbleBee and the flat bottom, but they are all over the place. And even some of the really great chassis makers still put some stuff out that leave gaps in areas, whether it's by accident or when they're jigging it. They're pulling it down too hard in a jig and it's flexing back. I just don't know. But a lot of guys just assume cranking it down harder fixes the problem. And as soon as you said that, like you could take that round action and actually make it oblong, like you could draw the bottom of the action out of round. That stunned me actually. So to put you on the spot,
you can just kind of tell if you sit an action in a stock, and especially one that's not been anodized or powder coated, and you can kind of get it if you can move it back and forth a little bit and see where the high spots are rubbing, and then put some high spot blue on it and then suck it down. And it doesn't take that much more, or it will depending on how messed up the chassis is or how good the chassis is. Just normal torque will start to distort it, the recommended torque that the stock maker and the receiver maker will. And it's not necessarily that it causes extreme accuracy issues. Depending on the stock, most of the time you won't see that much of an issue until you really, I don't know what you want to say. When you're trying to get under that 1/4 inch point, I guess, is when you're really going to start seeing that all those little things start stacking up against you.
What about the bedding of even like in chassis? Do you really recommend bedding even in chassis systems if you really want to have that really solid lockup and a great shooting rifle? Do you think bedding is that important?
Yeah. I'm always amazed how well rifles and chassis shoot without bedding, but if I have the choice, I bet them.
So on to the BumbleBee. So the BumbleBee is a 700 round, but it's sort of flattened on the bottom. And I really like how you guys, you took your time on this action, because you brought one of the working prototypes to the NRA annual. It might have been like 2 years ago or even 3 years ago. You were still working and sort of fine-tuning it a little bit. And so you took your time and you paid attention to all these little things that most people would just wow, it's good enough. But people do hot rod cartridges, and they come up with these crazy pressures and pushing things way harder, and those issues can come up. But the 700 with the flat bottom, was that so that most stocks that are out there can be fitted? Or I know McMillan now offers the BumbleBee inlet and the Vampire inlet, which is long action, and XLR Chassis now offers it, but you still stayed with the 700 footprint on the bottom with the square. Was that like a collective decision, or was there a specific reason why?
Yeah, definitely a specific reason, because there's so much accessories available for the 700 platform as far as bottom metal and such, magazines, all that. So it just seems kind of counterintuitive to reinvent the wheel when there's already good working magazine platforms available.
So this will work with an M5 bottom metal, Badger M5, Hawkins M5, ADL, BDL, all of those.
Yep. And then it does have the notch in the front as well to use those magazines without the binder plate to give that extra 80 thousandths of seating length on the short action.
Nice. So even the PRCs, or if they want to get the bullet out longer, gives them the breathing room.
Yeah. And then like you were mentioning about the stocks, it's really quite simple to take an already inletted 700 pattern stock and machine it out flat to fit it. I mean, it's not anybody with a little bit of experience in a mill can do it. So it's not like you are stuck buying stocks that are already inletted for it, because it's a simple inlet, simple modification.
Now, are you going to offer for, like, let's just say a guy, because a lot of guys have their rifles or already have their stocks, like a Macmillan A3 or other chassis, are you going to offer that as a service for people to send in their stocks and have them inletted on the CNC there?
We did for the first, 2 years. We offered that. We quit doing it because there are stocks available now. Mm-hmm. They're already done. So, it's like you say, Macmillan has it. I know Manners as well has it. Mm-hmm. And like you say, XLR has it. I believe Daryl has also sent it to at least 3 other stock makers. I know he was AG Composites he talked to. I think he sent them a receiver as well.
So some of the questions that we get on the BumbleBee is, A, will it wear out? And B, how did you deal with the locking lugs? Because there's a steel insert that's actually slid in the front that the barrel will lock into, just like a traditional barrel would lock, and it's locked onto a steel face that's inserted into the face of the receiver. So the 2 questions that they ask is, how did you solve that problem? Because they ask, well, when you're closing the bolt, because it's a steel bolt, and the bolts are interchangeable from the Ignitor to the BumbleBee. It's just the same bolt design, a little bit different on the shroud. Changeable bolt heads. But how did you attack that issue, and the customers that are asking if it's aluminum, will it wear out?
So realistically, you'll have a hard time wearing it out. The receiver body is 7075 aluminum, which is pretty much the best tensile strength that's easily commercially available. And then it's hard anodized and Teflon coated. So, and when I say hard anodized, that is a mil spec hard anodized that is very hard. It actually is like a surface almost as hard as like our nitrided actions. Mm-hmm. The one thing is that the hard anodized will chip on sharp corners. Mm-hmm. But on like the areas where your bolt's riding and such, those are not sharp corners, so they basically wear indefinitely. We haven't seen any issues at all with wear on them, and that includes the opening cam area on the back of the bolt, mm-hmm. where the extraction cam is. That's a combination of, as far as the durability of that area, is a combination of the amount of area that we have contacting the back of the bolt handle, and then also the helix angles of that cam area match very well, so it doesn't dig in, wear out. We haven't seen any damage at all in that area. And then talking about the locking lugs, that is all hardened 4140 steel in the front of the receiver, where your barrel threads in, where your locking lugs lock up, and also your feed ramp is all part of that heat treated hardened 4140's insert. And of course the bolts are just a standard bolt hardness material we use in all of our receivers, and they're all nitrided. So
you're not going to wear out the lugs or the lug contact areas in the receiver. They're definitely almost the same materials.
Yep.
And then what type of weight savings did you see with it? And then, like, who would this be specifically after? Like, what market were you? Is there something you were setting out to do with it?
Well, yeah. I mean, initially it was, my thought was building, a sheep type rifle with real long range accuracy capability, and in a lightweight carbon fiber stock. Mm-hmm. That was my original goal, and they work well for that. But interestingly enough, the majority of rifles I've seen put together on them have been actually bolted into lightweight chassis systems. A lot of the magnesium XLR chassis has been really popular, and so we went ahead and had a batch of those made with the inlet for the Bumblebee and the Vampire. And people have made them more into a long range system using carbon wrap barrels that they're building an 8-pound rifle that would normally be a 13-pound rifle on something that would be as capable in a conventional steel action, steel barreled rifle with this standard weight aluminum chassis or standard weight fiberglass stock.
So basically,
does that make any sense what I just said?
Oh, it absolutely does. I mean, you basically can make it's not just, I mean, one of the things that we see here is even years ago where people were coming out with their quote unquote, hunting rifles, is they were doing everything to shave weight, and eventually to the cost of the accuracy of the rifle. So yeah, it was a pleasure to carry, and sure, you could shoot, 100, 200, maybe 300 yards, but the accuracy was not there. And so now you've got a rifle that is as light or can be made that light, but literally you could throw it down on the ground and run it to 1,000 yards and expect to hit some stuff.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, equal accuracy as you'd expect from something that weighs a lot more. So that kind of surprised me that that's where it went, but I guess that's kind of, the chassis system makes a lot of sense. It eliminates extra parts, magazine parts, and because it's built right into the chassis, and it's modular, as far as the different grip availability. It's just kind of like that bolt action version of an AR. So I understand why people like that, and with the magnesium versions of these stocks, it makes them light enough that it definitely makes it a very viable, carrying weight rifle.
Yeah, I think it won't be too much longer. You're going to see a lot of chassis coming into the hunting world that legitimately are good chassis that are strong. They're not flexing. They're definitely shootable, and the coolest thing is they're completely adjustable.
Yeah, exactly.
Get them fit right. So on to the Ignitor, because that one is like sort of one of my favorites as far as you were coming through. You got all the bat tactical type, solid steel receivers with the built-in rails, and those have been bomb-proof. I mean, we've been building on them here since about 2012, and then the Bumblebee has fit a niche that's been absolutely missing as far as like a super high-quality, capable rifle. But then the Ignitor was sort of awesome because it gets the same quality of a bat action, but at a price point that people can actually afford. Because I think one of the biggest misconceptions when people are purchasing receivers is they all look the same from the outside, so they assume they're all the same, and they just look at the price. And they don't realize how much work is involved and why one receiver is much more expensive than the other. But they all look the same, and they can't physically measure and actually see the difference. The specs aren't listed as to the quality of the insides and what the material is made out of. So tell me a little bit about like the history of the Ignitor and how you came up with the concept. I mean, basically, it's a sub $1,200 receiver made by Bat Machine with an integral recoil lug that's never been at that price point before. And I got to ask you a question, because we get asked this, like customers looking from $1,600 action, $1,700 Bumblebee, and then they look at the Ignitor at $1,180, and I tell them that, in my opinion, the reason it's less expensive is all the time that was taken choosing the right materials, the machining setup, the fact that it's a Remington round in the back saves a lot of machining time, and the coatings are different. But accuracy-wise, just because you're buying a $1,200 or $1,600 bat, they perform the same. A bat's a bat. There's no one's more accurate than the other. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. The Ignitor came about because there is a perception and a reality that our receivers are a little bit more expensive than a lot of the receivers out there. Part of that is you are getting more for your money, not just in overall quality, but it's also, like Jamie was mentioning, the VR and the tactical style actions. Those actions come fully nitrided, and that's something that none of the other receiver manufacturers offer, and it drives the price up. But
right.
once you've used an action that's nitrided, they're kind of hard to not use. It just the smoothness of them and the durability of having that. So we in our background too, it's kind of circling around this a little bit before I answer your question exactly. But
No, that's great.
We historically have made actions to order. In other words, a lot of custom features on our bench rest series of actions that were built to order. And so we never could really, building to order does not lend itself to keeping the price down. And so as we've gotten more and more into hunting and repeating type tactical receivers for the PRS NRL game, we have eliminated options to continue to be able to give a really high quality receiver without the price going through the roof that offering a bunch of options would lend to. And
well, I'm going to pause right there.
Go ahead.
Just because when you do offer all the custom stuff, every time you get to that receiver, you have to stop the process and sort of custom one off that one part before you can move on and continue manufacturing.
Yeah.
So it just really pumps the brakes.
The interesting part about that is you stand back and look at your whole operation. It's not just the machine being stopped or the program having to be swapped. It starts from the time you take the order with a custom order. You have to, and then that every detail that thing has to be tracked all the way through the shop. Everybody has to double check everything they're doing and verify that they have the right program, and the blank was the right size to start with to get all those features on it, and et cetera, et cetera. And then everybody in the shop has to take the extra time to verify everything right till the time it leaves the door.
Mm-hmm.
So the Ignitor is a no option receiver, and it's only made as a right bolt, right port. And your only option is whether or not you want to bolt that rail on there or buy a rail from somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And that allows us to do a decent sized run of them at a time, and allows, the machines to spend more time running, and there's not all this paperwork following every action through the shop to make sure it gets all its details. And as far as the actual, machining processes, quality, it's done exactly the same as every other receiver.
Right.
The bolts are 100% identical and interchangeable with the VR TR series, and the firing pin mechanisms as well. So all the same details, tolerances, fits are the same. So, yep, you're basically saving money on our ability to produce them more efficiently.
And in bigger quantities. What about the receiver itself, like the material it's made out of, and then the coating?
Right. We chose to just use 4140 and blue them rather than use our 17.4 stainless. We use 4140 quite a bit actually for some of the different bench rest receivers, but yeah, we chose to blue them. We find a lot of builders end up Cerakoting their actions.
Right.
And so it just seemed counterproductive to, spend the extra money on an action we're trying to save some people some money on to have the body nitrited as well. So yeah, so it's 4140 and it's blued. The bolt body of all those receivers is still nitrited, just like all the VR, HR, Bat Tactical receiver and the TR.
Mm-hmm. And you're going with the M16 extractor now right across the board? And integral recoil lug, which is huge. Yeah.
That's kind of one of those pet peeves of mine. I really don't like the whole washer style recoil lug, so I just don't make receivers that way.
And one of the things that sort of struck me on this one too, the bluing process you're using, when people say bluing, they're automatically thinking like the old Remington 700 that literally looked almost blue. But they're really nice, like almost like a semi-matte black. I mean, the finish on them is actually pretty sharp. If you wouldn't know it,
it's actually an industrial. I don't actually think they call it bluing, but it's a similar process, but it's an industrial one we have done locally here.
And so people, you tell them it's blued right away, they're thinking they've got a blue receiver, but it's actually really
it's
nice
black.
Yeah. And the other thing I thought was pretty cool, and you got to touch base on this just a minute. People really pay attention to details, that really are passionate about something. And so it's not a single pinned 20 MOA rail. It's a double pinned 20 MOA rail. And when you slide the pins in and you set the rail on top, it's tight, it's snug, it's exact. I mean, I was joking around here in the shop. I said, you could probably push those pins on and push the 20 MOA rail in place and shoot it with the screws loose, and it might not move all that much. I mean, it is super high quality. So you took the time to do double fit. Yeah.
Yep.
And I mean, it has to add a little bit of time to everything, but I mean, fantastic. I mean, rather than just putting the holes in and not even doing pins at all.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's if you're going to do it, you might as well do it right.
The igniters are short action, long action, and again, they have the interchangeable bolt face, which I think is absolutely awesome. And they're inlet on the bottom, Remington 700 stylish, and they have that slot so you can feed the longer rounds or the magazines without the that front plate.
Yep, that's correct.
That's awesome. So, what was your hardest part going back to the BumbleBee? What was the hardest obstacle you had to overcome when you were working on through the whole process? Because you basically designed the whole receiver in-house. And was there anything about the process that you found fascinating, something new that you learned?
Well, as far as difficulty, the only difficulty was maintaining inch 350 width so it would fit in Remington pattern stocks and be able to do the hybrid aluminum steel fit. That was the only real difficulty there. The thing that surprised me the most was when I went to start testing the first prototype and I was able to load up into the over 100,000 PSI range and still open the bolt. And even though the primers were falling out and the cases looked like belted magnums, I still able to open the bolt without a hammer. And the extraction cam worked fine and didn't destroy itself. And that wasn't even a hard anodized receiver. That was just a bare aluminum receiver. And I was really impressed with how it functioned. I did not expect it to. I mean, the numbers, when you're designing it and everything, the numbers tell you what you should get, but you always have your feelings of how you think it's going to work. And it worked. Its function and ability to take pressure was way beyond what I expected. And I mean, I pounded that receiver for like over 1,000 rounds with beyond max loads, and then took it to many loads at the 100,000 PSI, and it still function. I mean, I can go put it together as a complete rifle and use it.
And you were sending me some of the groups and when you were testing it, and you said that you really weren't putting much of an effort in the groups. You were shooting it for function and for pressure, and it was still printing.
Yeah, I was still shooting groups like what, half inch,
with no effort whatsoever.
and that was just on the test rail pressure, setup. So I didn't. It's kind of a goofy setup just to keep everything contained. If something lets go, and you're not really doing a lot of aiming. You're just pushing it back and shooting.
Yeah. And on top of that, you weren't really focused on massive load development or counting the powder down to the final kernel of grain.
No, nope, not at all.
That is awesome. So what do you got new coming up for anything new in 2022 that you're working on project wise you want to share, talk a little bit about?
Well, the one problem with the Vampire, I shouldn't say problem, but the one limitation of the Vampire is the largest bolt face we offer in it is the standard Magnum .532 bolt face, which covers plenty of decently large cartridges, but there's still a large number of people that want to use 338 bolt face. And the reason we don't make the Vampire in a 338 bolt face is due to the constraints of keeping the receiver inside inch 350 stock. We had to limit the barrel shank size to the standard inch and a 16th. And I found many years ago that a 338 Lapua makes a much better shooting rifle with an inch and an eighth barrel shank. It just allows you to push the pressures and not get excessive case stretching with the larger barrel shank. So people still like to build light rifles, relatively speaking, on those big boomers. And we had a local to us company, Unknown Munitions, here in Post Falls, Idaho, that approached us about trying to get the weight of the HR model down to match the titanium weight action. So we're building an action for Unknown Munitions called the Vesper. And it's a skeletonized version of the HR that weighs 26 ounces.
Oh, wow.
And so that will be shipping early this next year. You can look at Unknown Munitions website or their Instagram page. He's got some pictures of the first ones. So
yeah. I think I seen Daryl post something up on one of them where all the skeleton work was done. That's really awesome, actually.
Yeah. So, and then we're working with Bullet Central on a new F-class 1,000-yard style action based on their Nuvo series. Also, this is going to be an aluminum steel hybrid action. And yeah, so those are our two projects that are we'll be shipping those receivers in 2022.
Now, before I let you go, I want to ask you another question too, because I think it adds a lot to the quality of work that you do. The king of the 2 mile and all of the ultra long range shooting, the actions that you're making for that, you are pretty much dominating that sport now.
We try.
Yeah. I mean, what all actions are you making for, and what do you find for the guys that are really into the ultra long range shooting? I mean, you're really setting the bar, and most of them are looking to your actions. What's the calibers that you're going after, and what receivers are you making? Because I've seen some of the receivers, but what are you really doing much into that right now?
Well, it kind of depends on the shooter themselves, what they choose. But the two most popular for those are the EX, which is a full-size, I call it full-size, 50 BMG capable receiver. In other words, the port is quite long, bolt strokes long, to load and eject a full-size 50 BMG case. A lot of guys will still use that with the 416 Barrett or derivatives of it for that king of 2 mile. And then the receiver that we designed more are along the lines of the 416 Barrett is the EXS. It's just EX short, basically, is what that stands for. And it's 2 inches shorter. You can still shoot a 50 in it, but you just can't eject a loaded round. And of course, with the 416 Barrett being a little bit shorter, it works well in that. And then a lot of guys are running the Shytac in that action as well. 375 Shytac and the different Wildcats off of it. Those are the two top choices for King of 2 Mile. We still have a few guys that will use the CH model action, which is a Model M with a larger barrel shank to build a little bit lighter version. Actually probably quite a bit lighter version because it's inch 550 diameter instead of 2-inch. But it's not as capable pressure-wise as the EX series, which have much bigger bolts and lugs and 1.5-inch barrel shanks. So you're kind of forced into using an 1.75-inch barrel blank, minimum. But yeah, if you're serious about reaching out there, that's really where you need to be for longevity and being able to push those cartridges where they need to be pushed to get the speed and the ability for the bullets to stay stable.
So people can stop over the website to see more about all the different actions, Jeff, because it's not just, your heart has always been, where your business started was in bench rest. So you still do a lot of different bench rest actions. We have guys coming in and talking about the M models, and most of the stuff we build here is in 700 clone style. But you do a lot of other receivers, including, sort of dominating at King of 2 Mile. So they can stop over to batmachine.com. Also, do you allow people to pop in the shop and maybe take any tours, or if somebody wanted to call and visit the facility, do you allow that at all?
Yeah, we do. So far anyway.
So far anyway. And where are you located? I know you're close to Cabela's right there, but where are you located in Idaho?
Yeah, so we're in the Panhandle of Idaho, right off of Interstate 90, right at the state line between Washington and Idaho. And Post Falls. It's a beautiful, beautiful part of the country.
Yes, it is.
So,
and lots of good coffee everywhere, and some good places to eat.
Yeah.
Well, Bruce, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast here. I really do appreciate it. And then, folks, if you have any questions for Bruce, or if you want to reach out to him, you can call their shop there. Their number's on their website. You can send them an email. But really, if you listen to the podcast, even about the little things that they were thinking about, even just designing the Bumblebee, just says a lot about who they are as a company and the thought process that they go and they build such good quality stuff. But thank you so much, Bruce, for coming on.
You're welcome. Have a good day, Jamie.
All right, well, that was just one awesome interview. It's always a pleasure to have Bruce to take the time to come on the show here. And, just a wealth of knowledge. Every time I get a chance to spend time with him, whether it's here in the podcast or out at their facility in Idaho, just never ceases to amaze me on just how knowledgeable they are and really how passionate they are about the craft of what they do. Just before we continue on with the podcast, I do want to say thank you to MDT. MDT is also a proud sponsor of the show and a maker of fine chassis. And we do have the new HNT 26 here at the facility. You can come and check it out here anytime. And then we just did a review on the MDT HNT 26 on our YouTube page, and you're welcome to stop over and check it out. We really like the chassis a lot. So thank you, MDT, for being a proud sponsor of the show. But I do want to take time to just say real quick, we have several new rifles up on the website. Of course, we can build them in a tier 1 through tier 4 fashion. So you can come through and build the rifle completely yourself, or we can build the completed rifle for you. And you'll see some of the chassis that we were talking about in this podcast on our website. It's wolfprecision.net. And we're excited that we got them here. We're testing and working with them, and just really fantastic hunting rifles. The quality of the chassis that are coming out now are just totally 180 of what they were even just 10 years ago, and what they're capable of doing, how light they are, how strong they are, how accurate they can be made. So really, really interesting stuff. Some updates on the podcast itself is we will be putting out a new podcast that will be released every Thursday at 4 p.m. So we're really excited to get on a standard rotation. So if you're interested in the podcast, or you're listening, if you enjoy the podcast, stay tuned at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Each week, a new podcast will be uploaded and made available. Our next couple of interviews we're actually really excited about. The next one is going to be with Alpha Munitions, and we're going to be talking about some fantastic brass that they're making. That should be up within the next week or two, maybe next Thursday. Also, another really cool thing that we're doing, and like I had mentioned on a previous podcast, is we did post up some varmint hunting videos that we did nearly 2 decades ago on our YouTube channel. They were made live on Saturday, so if you get a chance, you want to see some really cool stuff, and maybe just some background and history of what we do and how we really learned to shoot and stretch the distances out. It was a lot of fun. It was called All Hogs Go to Heaven. We filmed and produced 2 long-range varmint hunting videos for the industry. Nearly 2 decades ago, we started this process. And what we're doing over the next course, leading up to Christmas and after New Year's, is we're going to release them segment by segment on YouTube. So look for new YouTube videos to come out every Saturday morning and every Wednesday morning. They will be posted up. Some are going to be reviews on some different stocks and chassis. We're going to be doing some reviews on the Ignitor as well as the BumbleBee that we just did on this podcast here. So we're going to do a nice video review. If the weather holds up, hopefully get out and give you a chance to see them in action at the range and all the things that we do there. So stop over to our YouTube page. It's Wolf Precision Inc. And if you enjoy the content, subscribe, sign up, hit the notification bell. We really appreciate that as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on the podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast and you know people that are into long-range shooting or this type of stuff, please feel free to share it. And if you really enjoy the podcast, if you don't mind leaving some nice comments on some of the different platforms that it's put out on, that really helps us a lot in the standings, and we really do appreciate it. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. My name is Jamie Dotson. I am your host, and you are listening to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building Podcast.